Testing, testing. All right, just getting everything set up here for class number 2. Okay, I'm just going to get started now as people are funneling in. We're going to start with some review, and then I'm going to kind of do a walkthrough of everything just to get started in case you do want to follow along live or on the YouTube version after. I'm going to pull up and share my screen. All right, just gotta move this guy over. Move this guy over. Cool. This camera. All right. So yesterday we essentially were going over some HTML, a little bit of CSS, which we're going to continue today, but I did want to give just a quick review for everyone on some important things. Just going to open this up like this. You know what? Let's go. Oh, how do you full screen? Ignore that. Okay, so we're talking about HTML and tags and the structure of them. Essentially, an HTML file is kind of something like this. This is pretty much as basic as it can get. We talked a lot about having opening and closing tags. So virtually all tags open and then have content within them and then close. So this file right here would open with an HTML tag and then close right at the bottom with the HTML. In between it is the head and the body. The head is usually metadata, not rendered. It's meant for stuff like the title and what images you might want to show on social and certain files you might want to include and a few other things. Whereas the body is, where the bulk of your content goes. You can put text in there, images, links, all that fun stuff. And we talked about a few different tags, for instance, a paragraph tag, which is definitely one of the more simpler ones, essentially has a name called P, and then you can have whatever content you want within it. We also showed a link tag, which was the first example of what has an attribute and a value. So in a link tag, the name is A, which stands for anchor link. And you can give it an attribute of href, and its value should be a URL. And that basically means when you click on this right here, that will render as like a nice link, it'll go to that web page. Another example we looked at was the image tag, which has actually many attributes, but two in the example: source, which is a link to the image. That can be a URL or a file that's saved in the same directory as your HTML file. You can also give it things like width and height and a few other properties. And these are just a few examples of some tags. We have heading tags, which is like big text to getting smaller and smaller. Bold, italic. We had stuff like a horizontal rule, which is like a horizontal line that goes across your page. We talked about unordered lists and ordered lists, which an unordered list is bullet points, little circles. I'm sure you've seen them. Whereas an ordered list is the exact same structure and still has the same element, a list item, an li inside, but it will actually automatically render numbers beside it instead of bullet points. So 1, 2, you don't actually have to write 1 in here. It'll figure it out based on how many things there are. Then we talked a bit about divs and spans, which can be thought of as really just rectangles that can have content within them. And there can be divs, you can have divs inside divs inside divs. You can kind of do as many as you want, depending on the structure you want to go. This part, I think in the last class, probably trying to understand the context of them was difficult because we didn't really get to the CSS layout, but today it will become a lot more clear, I hope. The main difference between a div and a span is a div, you can think of it as it fills the width of its container. So it fills your page from left to right, whereas a span is only as wide as its content. We talked a little bit about semantic markup as well. Essentially, that is just like divs and spans, really, just like divs actually, except they give some context. And this is meant for things like screen readers and SEO, search engine optimization, so we can understand the structure of your site a little bit more. It's good practice. Before we review CSS, let's just review HTML in a little more of a live way. So this is kind of that basic HTML file. I've been doing this for so many years and I still don't have this memorized. I usually just go to a website and copy and paste it, or I Google search like HTML boilerplate, just because there's no point to remember it. You can search the internet. But yeah, so we want to put any HTML inside of our body so that it renders on the page. So I'm going to put out, a paragraph tag as we talked about. This is a paragraph. We can put a link tag in, so and I'll do the content first. So the content would be my link, and we can give it attribute of href equals google.com. So that would, and I'll show it in a minute, that will render a link that will go to google.com. Cool. We'll put an HR in here, break it up a little bit. Let's put some bold text, bold text. We'll put some italic text, italic text. So for me too, I'm basically, and I'm going to go through this in a minute, in a few minutes, kind of like from scratch. But I just kind of want to do this quick review right now. But basically, I've saved this as HTML2.html. So if I find this in my Finder or my Windows Explorer, because it's a very simple web page, I can just open it right in my browser. So I'm just going to, HTML2, I'm going to reveal it in my Finder. Right over here, and I'm just going to open it up. And I'm going to bring it to my screen that I'm broadcasting on. And there we go. Let me close this and just make everything beside each other. I'll make it bigger so you can see it on the stream. So yeah, we wrote a paragraph, we wrote a link, I click that, goes to there. We made some bold text, made some italic text. While I show you, because we talked about it, but we didn't really do it, unordered and ordered lists. So I'm going to make a UL, which is unordered list, and I'm going to put list items in it, LIs. I can go, point number 1, point number 2, point number 3. And if I render this here, there you go, there's your bullets. Looks great. So to show the example of an unordered list, I'll copy and paste this. And all I have to do is actually change the UL to an OL. And I should need to remember to also close an OL, or it's going to run into problems. You'll see 1, 2, and 3. So I didn't actually, put 1 in here. If I was to do that, you're going to see it twice. The OL basically makes a bullet, but the content of the bullet isn't just a circle. It's based on how many things are there. And yeah, I could just, make a whole bunch and boom. There we go. Oh, one thing we don't have here is an image tag. And image src equals this. Now, image tags are one of the few exceptions to the rule of always opening and closing your tags, because an image tag doesn't really have content other than the image itself. So you self-close it, which is basically like this. It's kind of the equivalent of doing something like this. Oops, sorry. You think of it as kind of like that, but this isn't semantically correct, and your browser will get mad at you. So that's how we close it. Now, the source can be a remote URL, or it could be a local file. I'm just going to go to my favorite site, Place Kitten, your new favorite site, hopefully. And we're just going to copy one of these URLs here. This is just a place that you can get placeholder images that have cats in them. And there we go. And if you remember, we were able to give other attributes to an image tag. So for instance, if I give width, I can say width 300. That should make it just a little bit wider. I can also say height of 300. You'll notice it automatically figured out what the width should be based on the height, and vice versa. However, if I was to tell the browser, you know what, I want a width of 1,000, not 10,000, and a height of that, it is going to skew and stretch it because it's listening to you. It's not trying to figure out stuff on its own once you're being that specific. We'll just keep this as default size. If you don't put a width or height, it's just going to use whatever your source image's actual size is. In this case, 200 by 300. All right. So that's kind of the quick 5-minute HTML review. Let's talk about CSS again. So some fun facts about CSS. Screenshot this if you want to read it. I'm going to move on. So we talked about, first of all, inline styling with CSS. So that is the simplest, but probably the most tedious way to style things. But basically, you can put on any tag a style attribute, and then you can put multiple properties and values in it. So a property like color, and then separating it with a colon, will then, and then putting a value of red will make the text red. Font dash size, colon, value of 14 pixels, will make it 14 pixels. Pretty straightforward. There's other things than color and font size. There's things like background color, background images, font weights, border color, width, many other things. We talked a bit about measuring units. So pixels are kind of the standard go-to, and that's denoted by putting a px after a number in CSS. So 300 px would be 300 pixels. You can also do widths and percentages. So if you did 50% width, it's going to fill 50% of whatever it's inside. So if it's just in the body of your page, it's going to be 50% of your browser window. You can also do something called EMS, EM, and that's kind of like a ratio to your font size. So 1em, if your document's base font size is 14 pixels, for example, and then you say, I want a width or a font size or anything of 1em, it's going to be 14 pixels. If I did 2em, it's doing a multiple of that. So 2ems would be 28 pixels. You can also do 1.5, 1.2. It doesn't have to be a fixed number. Colors, lots of different ways to do colors. This is like the simplest way, but don't do it because there's only certain standard colors that your browser understands, and some browsers do it differently. So hexadecimal is usually the most basic way to go. And you can find these codes in pretty much any color picking tool, even Google, color picker, and there's Chrome extensions and Photoshop and all these things. You can also set a color just by its RGB value. So red, green, red. This is bad. Sorry, this should say RGB, not RBG. My mistake. I just noticed that now. But it's red, green, blue. Up 255 means max. 0 is none. So you can have any permutation in there, which I think there's about 1.7 million combinations or something like that. So this one would actually be full red because it's saying full red, no green, no blue, RGB colors. RGBA is similar, except there's a fourth parameter, which is your alpha. That's how transparent it is. 1 being it's fully opaque, 0 being it's fully transparent, and then any value in between. That's so you can make things that are, slightly see-through. So before we get into that, I'm just going to do an example here. If anyone was following along and having troubles, I'll try and keep this up so you can kind of look at. Let's do some inline styling. Let's get my browser open. This is where we were. So I can go style equals, and let's just do the most basic, color red. And there, it made the text red. I can also go font size 24 pixels. Now I purposely made a mistake here, just to show you that these mistakes happen. But what you're going to see, oh, it went back. What the heck happened here? That's because I didn't put a semicolon. If you have multiple properties, and just in best practice, you should always in CSS have a semicolon after a value. That way the browser knows, okay, you finished talking about this property, let's go to the next one. Because like this, it actually is thinking, oh, the color is red font size, 24 px, like it gets confused and nothing works. So semicolon, remember your semicolons. There, that made the font size bigger. What else can we do? We can also, what are some of the examples I have? Let's do some of the bold text. So I'm gonna do something funny here. It's a bold tag, and I'm gonna say I want its font weight to actually be normal as opposed to bold, which is very counterintuitive. And in fact, you shouldn't do that because why are you even using a bold tag? But for purposes of showing you guys, there you go. You can override, anything. And there we are. So, I could go through and I could style this and I could style that and I could do that. But as you could probably imagine, this is kind of like gets in the way of your content. Like really think of your HTML as the content of your website, not the styling. And if I was to style every single tag in here, and some would probably be the same because I want all the LIs to be the same way, it could get a bit confusing. And also, if you ever want to make a change, you might have to make it in 6 different places if you decide to change a color. So I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to show you review quickly on something called in-file styling. So what I can do in the head is I can put a style tag. And style tag is basically telling the browser, hey, anything in here is CSS. Okay, cool. And what I can do is use a selector. So one example of a selector is just pick any HTML tag that you might have in your document. So I have a P tag. And I'm like, I want to do something like that. So to do stuff with it, you use these what are called braces, the little curly brace, shift bracket key to get them. And I can now do basically what I was doing before, where I can say, color blue, save, come back here. And now my paragraph is blue. And what's cool about this is if I was to put a bunch of paragraphs throughout my page, they would all be blue, because this is just saying make all paragraphs blue. All right, that's helpful because now I haven't dirtied up all this content here. And if I decided to make a change, I do want it red. Look, I'm just changing it in one spot. I'm not going through each paragraph and changing it. So definitely, definitely better than inline styling. And then we can do things like, I can style bold tags. I can style my ULs. And I'll show you, so say I wanted to style, oh yeah, that's what I want to show next. So that's one way, styling things just by tags, and it's pretty straightforward. You can, of course, put many properties in here, but just like that, oops, 2 semicolons. And I can actually say, you know what, I want a background color of yellow, look like fire. And there's background colors there on those paragraphs. So that's good. But what if I had like one paragraph that is really special? I'm going to call this one. This is a special paragraph. what if I wanted to style this one differently? I could, of course, go in here and, do style equals color blue. And it's going to do that. But, what if I wanted multiple, special paragraphs? That still works. But again, we're in that same problem where we're muddying up this a bit, but we're also, if we ever wanted to change blue to red, we have to do it in at least 2 places now. So let's get rid of that idea. And what we're going to do is give these paragraphs a class. So I'm going to give it a class, which is just an attribute, and call it special. And let's do it for this one too. Special. So if I refresh this now, it's just going to go back to how it was. But what do I want to do here? So what I can do is I can say all P's that are special, do something different here. So this dot denotes like a class. So P with the class of special. And let's actually just make it special by making its font size, 20 pixels or something. So we'll see the special ones just got bigger there. And I can, of course, maybe make its background color blue, and so on and so forth. That's really special. So those are classes. We also talked a bit about IDs, but I also kind of was pushing that there's not really a purpose to using them. The only reason I wanted to explain them is because you might come across them at some point. But it's the same idea as a class. I can give this one an ID of super special. And I would do this, but instead of a dot, I would use a number sign that denotes look for an ID of super special, and then make its background color green. And there's the super. This is a super special paragraph. Wow, this website design is so good. We have a question in the Q&A about adding an image, having trouble adding an image. So let me review that before we move on to the next part of the lesson or the review. So an image tag, img is the name of the tag. And I'll just rewrite it from scratch. So img, and we have to give it a source. Source equals, and then any properties are put inside quotation marks. Generally double quotation marks. You can use single, but just use double. It looks nicer. And we have to remember to self-close it like that. So that's a basic image tag, and I'll get rid of this guy for now. There we go. He's gone. There's nothing showing up because I haven't given a source. So to find a source for my image, there's many ways, and let's just, instead of using place kitten, let's just search for cool image. Cool images. Sure. And hopefully this is one that I can. Yeah, so a lot of the time you can right click on an image you find online and copy image address. Not copy image, not save image, but copy image address. And once it's copied, I can then paste it right in here. It's a pretty long URL there. We'll save, we'll close this, we'll refresh. And it's there, it's just so big. And that's why we can also give it another property, which I will do right over here, of a width of, let's just give it a width of 300. There we go. It's a little more usable now. So I hope that helps with getting images working. I'm just going to undo this back to my place kitten because as much as I like jellyfish, this guy's real cute. Okay. So yeah, we were styling. We were doing some fun style in file. So I'm going to go back to my notes right now. This is basically what we were just talking about, doing inline, having a selector, giving it a property and a value. Remember the colon, remember the semicolon, colon between, semicolon after. So we were selecting by elements, by an actual HTML tag. We selected by classes. So my paragraph And we are selecting, we tried IDs as well, but I'm discouraging people to use that. IDs aren't really a good thing to use in CSS. All right. To demo the idea of cascading, what we're going to do is we're going to make a paragraph. I'm just going to copy this guy. Actually, yeah, I'm just going to copy that guy, put him here. And what I can do in HTML in general, we can have tags inside tags. So I'm actually going to put a span tag around the word paragraph. Okay. And if we go and render this, it's not going to do anything. Spans on their own don't really do anything. They need to be targeted by something like CSS to make them happen. So let's see, this would be, where's this one? Special. This is, okay, we're looking at this guy right now, I figured out. Okay, so what we can also do is we can say P. Now, if we use a space here and write the word span, this is essentially saying, look for any spans inside a paragraph and do something to them. And in this case, we're going to make the font weight bold. And there it is, font weight bold. And just to show kind of how this works, I'm assuming another span tag after this that says not bold. And it's not bold. And the reason is that we were saying only spans inside paragraphs. If I got rid of this right here and just did span, we're going to see that both are bold because it's saying, okay, all spans are bold. Cool, make them bold. But we're being more specific and we're saying, no, I only want spans inside paragraph tags to be bold. And that's where we are. So that's the idea of like cascading, where you can have things inside things. And sometimes it just might be like, you know, P, span, div, P, A, you know, whatever. And you can keep styling and do very specific things. All right, back here, we talked about that. We talked about that, the idea of like a span inside a P. Okay, very good. So that's our review. She got through in 26 minutes. That's pretty good. Giving us a half hour and a bit to go through stuff. So what I want to do before we get into this next part of this class is, especially for people that are maybe trying to follow at home, I just kind of want to go literally through from scratch of getting to a point where you can start coding. So I'm assuming that you have a web browser and you have internet and you're on a Mac or Windows, slight differences, but I think I convey the right information. So I'm actually going to completely close my VS Code. And I'm going to go here. So you definitely need a text editor. And I recommend VS Code. I think it's lightweight, it's clean. The more you get into stuff, there's really good plugins and extensions, but right in its most basic, it's fine. So VS Code, I'm just going to Google it. And I see this link here to download it. So I'm going to click that. And I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to choose this. And if I just wait here, it's going to tell me to download it. So I'm going to download it. Wait for it to download. I'm going to find my downloads folder. There it is. I'm going to open it up. Where'd it go? Oh, it just opened in the same thing. So basically on a Mac, at least, I think on Windows, it's even more straightforward because it'll just walk you through like an install process and then put it in your start menu. But on a Mac, I actually would go and I would actually drag it into my applications folder. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go replace. And because I still have a few VS Code things running, it's not going to let me. And you shouldn't even have to replace if you don't have it. But basically, if that, you know, after I did that, I would see in here a program called VS Code. And I'm just gonna close my VS Code instances so I can do it from scratch. The VS Code. You open it, great, you got this text editor. So what I need to do first is, right now this is just called Untitled. So, you know, if I do anything, I'm gonna lose my changes if I just close this. So the very first thing you always wanna do, never work in an untitled file. So I'm actually gonna go save as, and I'm going to make I'm going to make a folder called my website. And in here, I want to make this an HTML file. So in VS Code, all I have to do is give it a name. I'm just going to call it website.html. Save. So now I have my HTML file here, ready to go. So I'm going to give it a, I'm going to open up my HTML tag here. I'm going to open a head tag. I'm going to give it a title tag, my web page. Then after the head, I'm going to make a body tag. And I'm going to make an H1, and that's like heading level 1. And I'm going to kind of write the same thing I had in my title, because title, anything in your head doesn't show up. The title is kind of like the title of your page. That's going to be in your web browser tab, as well as what Google will see when they crawl you. Whereas this is actually now in the content. And let's give a little paragraph. Or, and I have just a shortcut to make lorem ipsum text, which makes my life easier. So I just typed all that text super fast. And there we go. Now, I've made something. Of course, the first thing I want to do is see how beautiful it looks. So in VS Code, and pretty much any text editing program, you have an Explorer, which is kind of like a list of all the projects that you have now, or all the files you have. Now, because this is, I just made this from scratch from new, which you will be doing too. I have to choose sort of like, what's my home folder of my the project that I'm working on. So I'm going to click open folder. And I don't want to pick the website. I just want to pick actually the folder that I'm in. So I'm not selecting website.html. I'm just picking this. And boom, and it's going to do a little bit of a refresh here. And it's actually now broken it down into all the files in my website, which right now is just one, but you'll see more as we go. And there we go. So now in what I can do is I can right click on this file and do reveal in Finder. If I'm on a Mac, I think it's probably reveal in Explorer on Windows. And if you're on Linux, you probably know what the hell you're doing. Reveal in Finder. And then I can just double click this and it's going to open it in Chrome. So there we go. I hope that kind of helps people have like a sort of a good starting point there. So yeah, to review, we downloaded VS Code. We made a website.html file. We wrote some very basic HTML. We saved it. And then we clicked on this guy here, which prompted us to choose what folder we're in and what folder we wanted to have on our sidebar. And then we were good to go. And by right clicking this and revealing in Finder and opening it, we're cool. And now anything I do is fun. So I can do stuff now. All right. Let's talk about the next part of CSS, since we're halfway through the class. So we talked about styling, and to me, styling is stuff like colors and you know, font sizes, and even we didn't go into everything you could do in styling by no means, but I think there was a good basic foundation laid there. The other half of CSS is what's referred to as layout. So everything we've kind of been doing, and from this point on, we're kind of seeing like you make something and basically they just kind of keep going down and, you know, vertically, and they're line breaking into new thing, and that's fine. But a lot of the time, you know, you see websites where there's a nav bar on the left-hand side and there's some stuff floating over here, and, you know, there's text being centered, and there's, you know, all these other exciting things happening. So we're going to talk a bit about that. Layout with CSS. Okay. Every tag in your website has what's called a position. This is like the type, the way it sort of behaves on the page. By default, your position is static. So if you don't write a position, it's just static. And it's just basically what we've kind of been doing here, where they just kind of like, they live in their own world, and, you know, the next thing kind of comes down and the next thing comes down, or whatever. So that's fine. There's also position relative, which is very, very similar to static. And in fact, you could kind of, until we get into some more advanced stuff, you can kind of assume it's the same. So just kind of think of both of those as like default positioning. Things go after each other. Then there's something called position absolute. So, and I don't know how to explain it that well, but I can show you. So let's make, I'm going to make a div. I know we haven't talked a lot about what divs are, but we're about to. But divs are basically rectangles. And I'm going to give it a class equal to box. And we're going to go up here and we're going to make that style tag so we can put some CSS. And I'm going to say box. So dot box. So anything that has a class of box. I'm going to give it a background color of red. I'm going to give it a width of 32 pixels and a height of 32 pixels. We save and come back here. There's my lovely box. And again, it got positioned, you know, it went after all this stuff because that's just how positioning works by default. What I'm going to do is give it position absolute. Absolutely. Now let's see what happens. Oh, nothing, but things will happen. So once something's position absolute, I can give things like properties of top of, let's say, top of 5 pixels and a left of 5 pixels. And there we go. So now it's no longer conforming to, you know, the content around it. It's basically going to the top 5 pixels and the left 5 pixels of its container. So container in this case, because there's nothing else, the body is its container. So you actually see, look, top left of that. Now, if I got rid of position absolute, you'll see that it doesn't behave that way. It's still where it normally would be. So once I have absolute, I can do things like top and left, and then it becomes part of that. So I'm going to turn off position absolute, and I'm actually going to make this box bigger. There's our red box. And what I'm going to do is actually inside the box, make another class called inner box. And I'm going to go class of inner box, background color. Let's make this blue. Let's give it a width of 32 pixels, height of 32 pixels, and we'll just do that for now. And you'll see it's inside of it, and it's just in the top left corner of it because that's where it would that's just kind of like its default spot. It's inside something. It's going to try and find the, you know, the coziest little place to live. But I could again give it position absolute, and I'm going to give it a top of 5 pixels and a left of 5 pixels. So now what happened? Wait, it left the box. Why? I wanted it to be top and left of this, but it went out here. The reason for this is because something absolutely positioned, and I have a good, I think, an explanation of this here. It's position relative to the nearest ancestor. So you would think the ancestor is this box, but because this box is position static, it doesn't conform. It basically kind of ignores it as its parent. So what we actually have to do when we're trying to have this sort of situation of things inside things positioned, we actually need to give this a position of relative. And there we go. It's position relative. So with that on, I can then essentially anything I do in here is going to be relative to its nearest relative ancestor. So inner box being at 1515 is, if you were to measure this, I'm sure you would find that it is 15 pixels this way and 15 there. So top and left, that's cool. I can also do top and right, for instance. Oh, there we go. I can go top and, or let's keep it as right, but go bottom, 15 pixels. And of course, I can go bottom left, 15 pixels. And you can kind of move it around and all that sort of stuff. So it's a little bit on positioning. I hope that part wasn't too confusing, but yeah, essentially absolute positions allow you to do things like top and left, bottom right, that kind of thing, and it will go where you want it to. Versus if I do turn this off, it won't behave the same way. It's going to go right up to where you would normally expect it to go. Cool. The one other position that we haven't talked about yet. So we talked about static, that's just the default. We talked about relative, which is like, okay, when you want to have things inside other things, make sure the parent is relative so that it understands where to go. Absolute is when you want to position things like really specifically somewhere. Then position fixed is relative, instead of to its parent, it's relative to the viewport. So the viewport is really like what your browser is rendering at that time. So my viewport is, you know, this big white rectangle. So if I made box, for instance, instead of position relative, position fixed, it's right there, which seemed a lot like absolute, but let me show you the main difference here. I'm going to make my browser small and start scrolling. Oh, it's not, it's literally stuck to the browser window. It's not stuck to the page, compared to if I made this absolute. See, now it's scrolling with me. It's relative to, you know, the content of my page versus fixed, which is relevant to your actual like browser. So that's how you get those nice little, you know, nav bars and stuff that kind of follow you. Position fixed generally. Okay. So yeah, we talked about static, relative, absolute, and fixed. I'm just going to skip that. Okay. Now this is probably one of the hardest things in our layout is what's called the box model. And I'm going to do my best to explain it. I'm also going to tell you now that like you don't necessarily have to fully understand or know this. It's going to be something that you play around with and eventually, you know, figure out after a lot of troubleshooting, because it took me a long time to really understand what the heck was, you know, going on there when I would use certain attributes. So I have some stuff written here, but I have a diagram that will make this a lot easier, I think. Okay. And you know what? We'll keep that diagram. I'm going to put it over here and scroll back to it. And we're going to do some stuff with our, we're going to make a new thing. How should I do this? I'm just going to get rid of my inner box. And I'm going to get rid of this. And we're just going to put this back to how it normally was. Okay. Great. And can I put, I think I can see all these things at once, possibly. Okay, the box model. So I'm going to make a box, and we already have a box, and we're going to put some content in it. I am box. And I'm actually going to get rid of the width and height and the top, whatever, and I'm going to make its background yellow. Okay. So we have a box, and it has some content. That's this part here. Now, on any box, which a box is basically everything in HTML, like everything renders as a rectangle. It's content, essentially, it's structure. So there's kind of these 4 different layers. Starting at the inner, and what I'm going to do, okay, just to make this really clear, I'm going to give this a border of 1 pixel. I know we haven't talked about border yet, but this will just make the picture a little bit more clear. Okay, so it has a border of red. So right now the content, essentially the content is butting right up against the edge of it, the border of it. And that's all fine, but a lot of the time you might want a little bit of what's called padding. So I can essentially be like padding top of 8 pixels. And you're going to see that, okay, you know, the box now has some padding on the top. Still doesn't look that good yet, so let's give it some padding bottom. Cool, we got that. And I think you could imagine that some padding left would be nice. And I'm going to give it padding right too, even though in this case you're not going to be able to tell because the content doesn't go all the edge, but there we go. I am a box. And you know what? Just so I can actually demonstrate it, instead of I am a box, let's put some lorem ipsum in there. There we go. So we have some padding. Now it looks like there's like extra padding here, but that's just because this next word is so big that it line breaks. I can make this even more clear by actually doing text align justify, which is like a newspaper sort of rendering so that the fonts get stretched out to have this hard edge here. Okay, so we have that. So we had content, and content is just like the actual content, and it will be the size of whatever the content is unless you tell it otherwise. And let's tell it otherwise. Let's actually give it, when you give something a width and a height, you're basically telling what its content width is, what this guy is here. So I'm going to say a width of 400 pixels and a height of 400 pixels. So we're a box again. And the 400, so the content is here. There is some nice padding, all that kind of stuff. And I can kind of show this. If we move you over there, put you here, and we scroll down to, so what I did right there is what's called the inspector. So I can right click on Chrome, on Safari. Safari is a little more complicated. You have to enable debug mode. So I would just say use Chrome. But yeah, you can inspect your page, and it essentially will show you the source code in like an interactive way. So I can go here and I can actually see, and when I highlight, it kind of shows you some things. You'll see like that like more tealish color, that's the content. And then where it gets a little bit lighter in color, it looks yellow right now, but that's just because there's yellow under it. That is your padding. And then where it, you can't see this because it's only 1 pixel, but that red box is your border. And then the very last thing, this orange, is what's called your margin. So that's the last level. But let's talk about border for a minute. So we talked about content, and that's either like going to be automatically, the size is automatically determined. Let's get rid of some stuff so you can see it all. So content is auto-determined unless you verbosely say, I want a width of this and a height of that. Padding is something you can put in. By default, it's 0. I believe on most browsers. And we did padding top, padding bottom, padding left, padding right. Now, this is kind of ugly. I'm writing this a bunch of times. If they are just the same number, you can actually just go padding 8 pixels because it knows, oh, boom. And that'll essentially be the same thing. There we go. Now, border. Border is the next thing. And I'll do this a little more verbosely. So there's 3 different properties I can add. Border width. And let's give it a border width of 5 pixels. I can give it a border color of red. And the last parameter is border style. And that can be something like solid, which we'll try first. We'll see. Look at that beautiful red box, 5 pixels wide. But there's other styles you can do, such as I think dashed, and that'll do this really nice effect. Everyone loves that. I think there's like something like dotted. I don't think I ever used any of these, but they're there. We're gonna go back to solid. Okay. So as a root, content, padding, which is that little thing there. And let's actually increase the padding just to show what would look different if we had like 32 pixels of padding. Boom, you saw the whole box got bigger there. Very exciting. And that's because, you know, when we are setting the width of the box, when we're saying 400, we're not talking about the whole box. We're talking about this part here, the content. So it's important to know that if you want something to be 400 pixels on your screen, and you set 400 here, it means you need to make sure everything else is 0, the padding, the border, and what we'll get into in a minute, the margin. Otherwise, it is going to get wider. Okay, so we have those. The last one is margin. And similar to padding, this is very similar to padding in some ways. So I can go margin top, 10 pixels, margin left, 20 pixels, margin bottom, 5 pixels, margin right, 40 pixels. So top of 10, left. Let's see what that does. So you'll kind of see it moves some stuff around. And if we go to our inspector here and look at our box, see this orange right here? So that is essentially the margin that's being applied. So you see it's pretty tall on the top. The bottom is really small. It's like 5, so I can't move my mouse and show it. But on the left, there's 20. And on the right, even though I put 40, it's pushing it all the way to the end. And that's just because an element by default, a div by default, it needs to take up the full width of its container. Even when you say its content width is only 400, it's still taking up all that space in the window. So technically me putting 40 doesn't do anything in this case. If I refresh, you're going to see it's exactly the same. And that's just because it doesn't, it needs to take up that much space. I imagine if I made this like 1,000, and I'm just imagining, I hope I'm right. Yeah, you still can't see it, but we'll ignore that. Okay, so yeah, content, padding, border, margin. And the combination of those things allows you to place things, you know, in particular ways and make stuff look nice. All right, oops. Okay, I know that was probably a little bit tedious, but I hope it made some sense. Okay. We talked a bit about this too, where we can kind of do shorthands. So, you know, we wrote padding, all these different paddings. Something I didn't show was that, so we did the shorthand of padding of just doing 32, but we can also do a shorthand of, and I'll use margin as an example, where I could just put 10 here and that would work. But say I wanted very different ones, I can put multiple values here. So I can do 10, 20, 5. Sorry, I'll just make this one 0. And this is essentially the exact same thing as here. Basically how it works is it's like a clock and it starts at noon. So the first value is the 12 o'clock, so the top, and then it goes around to 3 o'clock to 6 o'clock. So top, right, bottom, left. So you can do shorthand like that as well. We also saw border. So we wrote border width, style, and color, but you can also shorthand that one by just going border. You do the size first, the color next, and the style after. Semicolon. So that essentially allows me to, I could erase that. I'll just comment it out. I can also erase these, but I'll comment it out so you can kind of see the example. And we showed the padding one, fair enough. And you'll see that nothing will change here. So those are like shorthands, and they're super, you know, important to use. Otherwise, you're like writing this is a real pain. Writing this, it's not too bad. Okay. So far we've been talking about CSS in the way that we've been including in the same file, and that works fine. But sometimes your website might have multiple HTML pages, and generally it will. And with a shared style, you don't want to have to duplicate and copy and paste this same huge snippet of code into every one of your pages. It's going to be difficult to maintain. It's also bad for bandwidth because it means people have to download this same thing over and over every time they click a page. So it's not really a good idea, but it's good for learning purposes. So we put things in a style tag, which is good. But what we're actually going to do, and I'm going to open up this little guy here, and I have, you know, I have my website file, but I'm actually going to go and make a new file. What happened? New file. There we go. Style.css. It's a CSS file. So I have my website here. I have my style here. I'll make this a little bit bigger. And what I'm going to do is actually copy this whole thing, and I'm going to paste it in here. Now, very important to note, this is a CSS file. It already knows that it's CSS, so you do not put these tags around it because it won't work. That's the only reason I can go. The point of doing that HTML is to tell your HTML, hey, everything between here and here is CSS. But because it's a .css file, it already knows to do that. So you do not put these style tags. We have this here, all good. I'm just gonna, I'll keep those, whatever. And I'm gonna erase this here now. And oops, one too many. Now, if we go back to my page and refresh, we're back to like the most basic. And that's because we have to tell the HTML page, like, open up this specific CSS file. So to do that, do I have an example? Good, because I always forget this syntax. I'm going to copy this guy. Ooh, is that going to copy everything? Okay, I'm going to paste in here, but I'm going to, oh, yeah, I did copy everything. One sec, we're good. Okay, I'm going to retype this. So we want to essentially link an external file. So I start that by in the head by making a link tag. And I want to tell it what type of thing it is, so it knows what to do with it. And it is a style sheet. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. So it's considered a style sheet. We have to give it a type of what kind of style sheet it is, because there are technically other kinds. So we want to say it's a text, its MIME type basically is text / CSS. And we want to give it an href. And the href will be whatever the name of my file is, style.css. And this is another self-closing tag. In fact, a lot of tags that you'll put in head, aside from title, are self-closing. So I just erased the thing that I was copying from, and I'm going to save. And if we go back here now, boom, cool. So that's nice, because now my HTML file is a lot smaller. And I'm kind of decoupling my styling with my content, which is super helpful. So I'm just going to actually right click on this and view source. So this is that HTML, and Chrome's nice, and pretty much all browsers are nice because they'll show this to you. And it'll actually have a link to that external file. So I can actually click on this and see, oh, that's the CSS that's getting pulled in. So again, you can do this on your own web pages. If you're wondering why something's not working, a lot of the time is maybe you called it style1.css by accident, which is not going to work. So if I was like, why isn't this working? I might view page source. I might try and click this, and I'm going to get this file not found error. And of course, that means that I did something wrong. There we go. We're back. So this works. Everything else is the same. The only difference is now I can, work in this file and have my HTML here. Generally, when I'm working between HTML and CSS, I open it up so that I have these two windows here, so that I can see my content, and I can be working on it here all at the same time instead of flipping back and forth. But that's just my pro tip of the day. To do that in VS Code, the easiest way is you right click here and you go split, and I usually split right. And then I have this on both sides, and I can now take this if I want it over here, or I can move this back over here, that kind of thing. So I have my two different tabs, but we don't need to do that right now. Okay. Good. I think we're going to get through this. I know we only have 4 more minutes. So as you saw, like a lot of the time, when we made an H1 or a paragraph, there was kind of already defaults made for those things. Like, H1 is really big text, and as it should be. The issue is that those decisions are made by whatever browser the user is using. So Chrome might be its defaults might be slightly different than Safari, might be different than Explorer, all those kinds of things. So one concept I just want to show you is called a CSS Reset. And in some way I use either a reset or what's called a normalizer on every project, because otherwise you run into weird issues between different browsers. So to show you what this is, I'm going to open this link. And this guy, Eric Meyer, he made this thing many years ago, and it's for resetting, it's perfect. But I can just copy and paste this. And this is CSS, so I can copy and paste it, and I can put it at the very top of my CSS file. And what this is going to do is actually normalize everything. So my H1 no longer is big. There's no longer this extra padding. The only times there's some fun is the stuff that I did. So it's a good, not necessarily something you would have to do when you're just trying stuff out and figuring it out, because sometimes having those defaults are nice because you can just quickly have, oh, a link is blue and that kind of thing. But generally on a real project, you do want to use a reset so that it forces you to be like, oh, what do I want my H1s to be? And what do I want my font colors to be in sizes and line heights and all these other kinds of things. So I just paste in there. But for workflow wise, it's usually better actually to, because you don't necessarily, the reset's never going to change. So I'm actually going to make a new file. I don't know why, reset.css. And I'm going to paste the reset in there. That way this file is just more clean and just about my content. And then as long as I would just copy this line and make this say reset. Whenever you're doing a reset, like it should be the very first file you include, because otherwise your reset's going to start overriding your own stuff. So stuff gets implemented in order. So they're the same thing, except now my CSS file is much cleaner and good to go. So that's a reset, and basically levels the playing field so that things are consistent. All right. I'm going to, because we kind of did this at the end of last class, the review of HTML, and we also kind of redid it today. I'm going to skip this for time purposes. CSS, we already kind of re-reviewed most of it, but the main new things were the ideas of like positioning things relative, absolute, or fixed, being able to like override certain styles. We talked about the shorthand methods, and I'd say most importantly was talking about the box model, which was the whole content, width, padding, margin, and border, and how they all play with each other. All right. So what we're going to do next class is what I call, so I kind of have these courses broken into astronaut theme sort of things. So I don't know if you noticed, but groundwork is kind of like the tutorial, the lecture sort of thing, which is basically what we've done the last 2 days. Tomorrow we're going to get into what I call liftoff, which is us actually going through and I'll re-review the getting VS Code set up again, but it will be kind of like a follow along sort of situation if we can make that work. And I'll be able to, I find it's easier to even teach things when I'm making something real instead of just pasting in cat photos. So we'll kind of go through all the stuff we've learned and build a really simple page. Yeah, so that's where we're going to leave it off today. Cool. I hope everyone is enjoying the course. And look at that. It is 3 o'clock. So we are good. I'm going to stop sharing my screen if I can figure out how to do that. Stop screen share. There we go. All right. And yeah, that's it for today. Hit me up on various social media if you have any questions. And see you guys tomorrow. Bye.